Good evening. Hope you're all having a good Tuesday. We're back for another episode of Meteorology Lab. And also we do a little bit of astronomy, and there's Venus getting a little bit lower on the southwestern horizon there. So you can go outside and check that out while it still exists. As far as the storms we had over the Midwest last night, things have quieted down a lot, and the storms have shifted down to the Gulf Coast. And you can see that we've got them here in the New Orleans area, and really not much left here except for these marine warnings. So nothing severe there, but you do see a little bit of a irregular appearance to the squall line. So the severe weather threat not completely over. We could still get maybe some weak bow echoes out of maybe a few portions of these, but for the most part it's going to be over, and they are moving to the southeast. But even though they're non-severe, we still like to look at them. So let's look at the structure of the squall line. Let's go out to the Gulfport area, Pascagoula, and go up to a higher tilt. And I'm going to set a dot on the core in the leading edge of this bow right there. So what happens when we go aloft? We don't really see any overhang. When we have severe weather, we expect to see the storm kind of leaning forward with height. So there would be higher echoes over this region, but we've actually got kind of the opposite. So most of the higher reflectivities out to the northwest of there, and they kind of fall off with height rather than get strong. And let me see if I can do a cross section here. This is that line near Pascagoula. We'll zoom in a little bit, and you can see it's not all that impressive. Just the higher reflectivities down near the surface, and the intensities kind of drop off with height, and the heights are not too significant either. So not very much overhang on the forward side where we have the inflow going up into the storm. We just have this kind of very lazy, weak flow, very weak vertical lift there, and not much severe weather. So that's what's happening in Mississippi right now. Okay, let me set up here, and before I get too much further, let me check the levels and make sure the audio is okay. Let's see, we got Andrew, always the first one in. Sue M, seems like always the second person in. Kevin McKinney, Brian Harp, and Lexi. Ryan Toomies is here. Eddie W, Michael Burrell, and Ryan says, violent night last night watching the live streams and posted video. Yeah, glad we're getting a break tonight. And I need a break too, because I've got a couple of contract jobs I got to get out of the way. So we're probably going to limit this to about 20 minutes or so. Highs in the 70s across Texas and Louisiana. So very slight cool down. We're kind of returning to like late March, early April highs. Still kind of on the warm side there. This is showing the long waves. Well, actually 500 millibars shows kind of a combination of short waves and long waves. But kind of what I'm seeing here, the large scale flow. Maybe a bit of a long wave, kind of like that, with smaller scale waves embedded in the pattern. So that would be a ridge right there, a trough right there, a ridge right there, embedded in this long wave trough here. Jet stream going from the Great Basin area through Dodge City and up to Chicago. And if we use that relationship between the trough and the ridge, and place the jet in here, we can see almost immediately that we're going to expect to find the cold front roughly from the Chicago area down to Louisiana and then a warm front extending across the Great Lakes like that into New York. And again, this is just a preliminary look at where we think the fronts would be supported by the upper air patterns. Down at the surface, they could be much different. And in fact, with the jet going all the way up to Lake Superior like that, I may be inclined to carry that even further north, kind of like that. So we'll check out the surface patterns and see if they show that there. There's the satellite showing the baroclinic system all the way into Quebec and near Lake Ontario there. So yeah, it is pushing pretty quickly eastward. And we have to keep in mind that upper air chart was for this morning at 12Z, so things have progressed eastward. And in the wake of that system, quite a bit of clearing and subsidence in Texas and the central Mississippi Valley right there. That takes us into the thermal structure of the atmosphere. And let's do that real quick. This is for 0Z about right now. And so we'll be looking for a cold front from western Quebec through Lake Erie, down into central Kentucky, and down to Alabama and the Texas Gulf Coast, kind of like that. Where's the warm front? Well, we could probably start that along the Atlantic coast around Maine, up in New England, and maybe lifting north like that right there. And then the remainder of that is going to be an occluded front. And we can see on this thickness chart there's quite a bit of warm air aloft over the occluded front. And keep in mind that an occluded front is where we have three air masses and one of them is lifted aloft. So the deepest warm air is located right here. We see that show up as kind of a ridge right there, a thermal ridge. And the Canadians will call that a trough, or a trough of warm air aloft. American meteorologists don't really recognize that. We mostly stick with where the occluded front is. But anyway, you get kind of an idea of what the warm air is doing around this increasingly barotropic system in Ontario. And that low will eventually push up into the Baffin Bay area and start decaying up in that region. And out in the Pacific, looks like things getting active once again right there. A warm front around Idaho into Washington, and a cold front extending down from Portland along the coast like that. And another occluded front there in British Columbia. But in between, just cold air advection and a little bit of a break in the weather here on the plains. We can take a look at a few soundings, and we know that Fort Worth is going to be in this very dry air on the lee side of that baroclinic system. Yeah, there's the sounding for Fort Worth, showing temperatures around, these are dew points, around 14 Fahrenheit, dropping below zero once you get about 5,000 feet above the ground. And you can see that at 10,000 feet, dew points are near minus 30. So very dry air aloft, and here you can see a little bit of subsidence in the mid-levels right there. And there we have a dry adiabatic low-level trace right there. Let me move that up a little bit. And as you know from watching the webcast, that's a good sign of air mass modification going on in the southern plains right there. But not much of a push of cold air behind it. Winds only about 10 knots out of the north there. And we'll take a look at one more sounding. Let's go up to Lincoln, Illinois. And we see even deeper cold air there. Very low tropopause, indicating we're very close to the base of that trough. And it looks like there's been a whole lot of air mass modification going on right there, and also very cold air aloft near the base of that trough. So that and the very warm conditions near the ground modifying the air mass, giving us a very steep profile here. So if we had the slightest bit of moisture here, we would likely see a lot of stratoQ. And maybe even with some diurnal heating, we could get some showers, snow showers, that kind of thing out of that system right there. How are dynamics looking? Let's go up to the 500 heights and vorticity. Most of those are pushing up into the Great Lakes area right there. So stronger vertical velocities going from about western Quebec down into the Lake Erie region right now. And there's the base of the trough right there. Probably some tropopause folding right in this area. And behind that we get the lower tropopause. And that's what we're seeing there on the Lincoln sounding. Very cold air. Maybe we can even pull up a sounding in that cold core right here up in Manitoba. Let's see if we can do that. We'll go to Pickle Lake in Ontario. And kind of a curious sounding right there. Showing very cold conditions near the surface. Looks like some mid-level subsidence here. Unusually cold air, or unusually warm air, around 600 millibars. Then we'll try International Falls in between. Yeah, still showing some of that warm air in the mid-levels. Interesting. Okay, I think we are pretty much set to go into the forecast. There's one last look at the MCS going, tracking southward along the Gulf Coast. And why are we not seeing much severe weather along that line? Well, one key would be the dew points. We can see that the higher dew points of 70 are located pretty far west out in this area here. Here's the 65-degree dew point line. So out here in central Florida up to Georgia, we're looking at dew points in the 50s. And that is supported by the surface data showing very poor moisture over that area right there. So that's certainly not going to support that squall line for very long. And the other problem at 850 millibars, look at those winds there. Winds only about 5 knots out of the south, so very weak inflow. This is almost like the opposite of what we have with a low-level jet. This is more like the absence of a low-level jet. Inflow into that storm, 20 knots at best. Over most of that storm is probably about 15, and the better moisture is out in this area where we have very poor storm inflow. So let's start out with the rapid refresh model. This is good for a look at the convective progression of the system. And you can see that the deeper moisture well out to the west. You can see that very poor inflow there. So let's see what it's forecasting. Okay, we'll run this forward through the evening. Squall line pushes out into the Gulf and dissipates overnight. So that's about 6 in the morning. So that's going to be all she wrote for that squall line there. And let's look at the synoptic picture here. Okay, so that's what's going on right there. And I'm going to take a quick look at the chat here. Jason Boggs mentions a few deaths from the wildfires on the Great Plains. People flicking cigarette butts out the window. Yeah, that was a big problem when I was living in Oklahoma City. There was a lot of that going on just outside the city. That started a few fires near where I lived. Sue M. says, local forecasters will not dare to call for accumulating snow on Saturday there in Illinois. Okay. So let's roll it forward and see what the GFS does show. There's that high pressure there in the southern plains. Strong cold air advection working in through the Midwest right there. Very deep 970 millibar low up to the north. That's off the top of the screen. And by the time we do the webcast tomorrow, it's going to be looking like this. High pressure over Georgia. Starting to get a little bit of return flow here in Texas, and that will bring the moisture up northward very gradually. The main front itself looks like that retreats up to the north. Actually, is that a new front? Let me take a look here. Yeah, that probably looks like a little bit of frontogenesis up there. The actual active polar front well to the south. This boundary seems to be firming up right in this area from about Nebraska to Iowa, and then linking up with this system in Oregon right there. So for Thursday, we're looking like this. Another system coming out of Canada, 1048 millibar low up there. And this is what we're looking at for the fronts, something like that. And that'll push southward into Texas a bit. Front's looking like this by Friday evening. And then we're seeing this first system tracking down that front to the southeast. So there's the warm front and tail end of the front looking like that. And this is kind of acting a little bit like a Alberta Clipper as it moves southeastward. Very fast-moving system, and these fast-moving systems do tend to be a little bit difficult to predict. And we see, looks like maybe a bit of a shift southward in this system compared to yesterday's model. So we're seeing a trend here in the model, and that's pushing it more towards the Arkansas and Tennessee area. So maybe that will tend to diminish the amounts over central Indiana right there. So we're looking at Saturday midday here. Freeze line from about Emporia down to Springfield and down to about Batesville, Arkansas, Jonesboro. Actually, Jonesboro is out of town. I'm trying to remember northeastern. I know there's Blytheville, so maybe that's what I'm thinking of right there. So freeze line will be hanging out through that area and shifting eastward into the Nashville area. So probably south of Indiana right there, front pushing to the south here through Texas. A little bit of rain over the weekend. Then we get another one of these Alberta Clipper systems right here. A little bit of an inverted trough here through Iowa. That's probably a little bit of an included front there. This is on Monday. And that may shift there into Indiana, but maybe acting a little bit more like flurries through that region. So we're getting a little bit of a northwesterly flow starting to get set up around mid-month through the central U.S. And then looks like around the 15th, a pretty good system off the East Coast. You see that right there. Maybe a little bit of snow there in the Long Island and Cape Cod area. Although that system is pretty far offshore and looks like a warm-up for the central part of the U.S. And any severe weather, I'm not really seeing much. Maybe at the very end there around the 23rd. So looks like chase prospects not looking very good for the next couple of weeks. But picking up here around the 23rd as things get more dynamic out to the west. Okay, well, that's about all I got for today. Again, not a whole lot going on. Everything's kind of pushing eastward, and we're getting into a little bit of a quiet spell, but some more action coming up around 2 or 3 days with that next Canadian system moving southeastward. So that's about it for me. I appreciate you joining, and hopefully we'll see y'all tomorrow. Thanks.
Thank you.